Hi, welcome to episode 40, Intro to Counterpoint. So, up to now, we've mostly been talking about chords as though they're these objects, right? These are chords. Pretend these giant rectangles are chords. And we just kind of move from chord to chord. If you are a pop musician and you play guitar, say you're like, look up a song, you're looking up chords to a song probably, and you're just playing the chord progression. We call it like a progression of chords. Well, you're already doing some counterpoint, probably, because as you know, there's more than one way to play any chord. There's more than one way to voice it. And presumably, if you're playing guitar, keyboard, or any kind of chord instrument, and you're going from chord to chord, you're not just shooting around to any old version of the chord or any old voicing of the chord. You're going to ones that kind of follow smoothly, that don't jump around, where all the notes in one chord kind of like smoothly connect to notes in the other chord to a greater or lesser degree. The way that the notes in a chord connect to the notes in another chord is something we usually call voice leading. And we think of voice leading as kind of part of the whole study of harmony. Harmony, you can basically say, is like the study of chords, the study of how notes work together to form chords. A lot of times we talked about this as a vertical aspect of music. So like we're stacking chords up with notes, and what we're thinking of are these slices of time, right? If this way is time and this way is pitch. Let me write that down, what I mean. If you have like this set of axes, and this one is as time goes by, and this one is like pitches up or down, then chords are like these objects within this space, right? Chord 1, chord 2, chord 3, chord 4. Yes, vertical aspect. Well, now we're going to switch, and we're going to, instead of thinking about this vertical aspect, we're going to think about the linear aspect. So there's a line, there's another line. Maybe there's another line, 3-voice counterpoint, right? 2-voice counterpoint, 3-voice counterpoint. So what we're talking about when we're talking about counterpoint is this horizontal aspect of music. Instead of thinking about what these voices form from like moment to moment, we're thinking about what these voices are doing as they unfold through time. And the most important thing I want to say in this lesson today is that these are not really different, right? It's just a different perspective. Whenever you're looking at counterpoint, you can always pause and like look at a snapshot of what's happening vertically. And it probably forms a chord, or some chord with some dissonant aspect that is going to get resolved. It'll form some kind of thing where we have all these rules and ideas about it in the kind of catch-all term of harmony or voice leading. But same thing, you can take any set of chords and you can tease apart the voices in the chords, and maybe if you like follow especially the top line of all your chords, it'll form a nice melody maybe that by itself could be taken out of the chords and horizontal, and looked at from a horizontal standpoint as a melody. So kind of harmony, melody. But not just melody, right? If you look at this word counterpoint, it's from a long time ago when people wrote music down. A note was a point. They had a fountain pen. So like a note head would look kind of like a diamond. As you think about like the pen nib, they would just go like that. But if you do that with a fountain pen, it looks like that. And so they called it a point, or a punctus in Latin. And then contrapunctus, right? Contra just means above. And so a contrapunctus would mean you maybe had a set of points and you write a set of points above it. So setting a melody above another melody. And it's just been broadened over time to mean the whole process of how you take a given melody and you set another melody against it or with it so that they behave together in a way that makes sense while also behaving individually in a way that makes sense. So the first thing about counterpoint to know is that counterpoints are made out of good melodies. And there's kind of some rules we're going to learn about that. So good, right? I should put that in quotes. Good as strictly defined in the music theory sense is a little different than just like good, like if you like it. We're going to have some rules of what makes a melody good. One of the things we want a melody to do in the counterpoint world is to start and end on tonic, for instance. That might not happen in every melody you ever look at, but when we're working on counterpoint exercises, that's something that makes a melody good. Lucky for us, counterpoint has this whole tradition of handed down melodies that we love that are called cantus firmi, or a cantus firmus. Cantus, Latin word for song or melody, firmus, hard. So set. So like the hard melody that you can't change. It's kind of like the given, and then what you have to do is create a new melody that goes with it. We usually call the cantus firmus a CF. And kind of since time immemorial, the way we work on counterpoint is that we'll write our cantus firmus. We'll write it, say that's our cantus firmus. And then we'll do two separate exercises. We'll do a counterpoint above the cantus firmus. Right? And so this counterpoint itself, what we hope for is that it ends up being just as good of a melody as our cantus firmus melody was. But we also need it to make sense vertically so that each interval between the two lines follows whatever rules we're giving ourselves when we're learning counterpoint. And the way we learn counterpoint since time immemorial is through this like evolving set of rules that we call species counterpoint. We're gonna get there. And then usually what we do is a second task where we also write a counterpoint below. And so same thing. This one will also make sense vertically if we take snapshots, right? And depending on the rules, there's different ways the lines can co-behave together. It's funny, the way we talk about counterpoint is about behavior, right? Harmony is more nouny, like we're talking about things, but secretly all along, harmony was actually about linear behaviors, actions. It's that thing I just keep saying throughout this entire Patreon. Music is made out of actions and relationships, not out of things. And so counterpoint is like a really great way to tease that apart. Let's talk about some basic aspects of counterpoint we're going to need, and that's as far as we're going to get in this lesson. Number one, there are kinds of musical motion in counterpoint. We kind of categorize our musical motion into 4 categories. So the musical motion is how two lines behave together. Lines can move in opposite directions, so maybe one note goes down and one note goes up. We call that contrary motion. Makes sense, right? We love contrary motion. And I'll get into why soon. You can have lines that move the same direction. And we call that similar motion. We like similar motion. We love contrary motion. We like similar motion sometimes. Sometimes we don't like it. There's 2 other kinds of motion. There's a subset of similar motion where if you move by the exact same distance, like let's say this interval x, and then they both move and they're still that same interval apart. That's parallel motion. So say this was a 6th and this was a 6th. Parallel 6ths. We love parallel 6ths. We love actually parallel. We often use 2 lines to mean parallel. 3rds and 6ths. But we hate parallel fifths, and octaves. What is this stuff I'm talking about? Love and hate? Well, these are things that we have to internalize when we're learning music. You might not really hate parallel fifths. If you like punk rock music, you probably don't hate parallel fifths. The guitar players are playing them all the time. But it's a value in the study of counterpoint that we're introducing today, that we hate parallel fifths and we hate parallel octaves. We will return to this again and again, so for now you just have to kind of take my word for it. In fact, we hate parallel fifths and octaves so much that we even hate if we land on a fifth or an octave when we move in similar motion. We'll get to that too. And these are our three preferred kinds of motion. There's another kind of motion that we don't usually really use in counterpoint called oblique motion, where one note stays the same and the other note moves. There's a reason we don't really use oblique motion in strict counterpoint. So what we're doing here is strict counterpoint. And it's also a kind of counterpoint we call species counterpoint. And it all goes back to this guy whose last name is Fuchs, who in the 18th century wrote a book called Gradus ad Parnassum. If you're a Led Zeppelin fan and a Latin scholar, then you know what that means. It means stairway to heaven, basically, or steps to heaven. And what it is it's like a set way of learning about how counterpoint works, kind of like almost a laboratory situation. It's not like real music. We're talking about like this tiny little subset of real music where we're going to follow these really specific rules, and it's entirely a pedagogical tool in order to teach you how to set a melody against another melody. Throughout Gradus ad Parnassum and every book about counterpoint, of which there are bazillions, there are two kind of values that show up again and again. And I kind of want to try teaching counterpoint around these values instead of around the rules. The values are independence between the lines. So you never want your two lines to sound like they are codependent. You want them to sound like they have their own lives, that they have their own wishes and desires and their own set of behaviors, even though they have to agree in a certain way. And then the other one is variety. In strict counterpoint, we don't want anything like a motive or a motif. We don't want anything that's, if you can tell where something was going to go because it repeated or something, we don't like that. We want variety. We also want variety in how our lines relate. We don't want to just always stay in parallel thirds or always be moving in contrary motion. We also want variety in what kinds of intervals are created between our notes. We don't want all thirds or all sixths. We want to throw in some fifths and octaves. So every single thing you learn about species counterpoint or strict counterpoint, I will try to relate back to these two chief values. Most important aspect of counterpoint. We want lines that have independence, and we want lines that have variety. And I'll give you a quick intro to what the species are, and that's all we're going to do in this video, and we'll get into first species next time. So the first species, we set one note for each cantus firmus note. We get one counterpoint note. And every interval has to be consonant. So that is, the cantus firmus to the counterpoint has to be consonant every single note. And that's pretty much it for first species. Second species, we're going to end up doing 2 notes per cantus firmus, and we're going to allow certain kinds of dissonance. Third species, we're going to allow 4 notes per cantus firmus note. Fourth species is weird. We'll talk about it when we get there. And then fifth species isn't really a species. It's called florid or mixed species. You can do whatever out of all the other species. And then you get to Parnassum. That's where we're going to get. Are you ready? Let's go.